Hello and welcome to the Essential Adventure Sport podcast, where our aim is to shed some light on the world of adventure sports, be that top tips and best practice for coaches, leaders or guides, inspiring expeditions, or just a chat with one of the many interesting people who work and play in the outdoors. We really welcome interactions and discussions, so if you have an idea of a subject you'd like covering, or you'd like to contribute to the show itself, then please drop us a message. So it's time to sit back and enjoy this week's episode. So hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Essential Adventure Sport podcast. This week, Nick and I are pleased to be joined by Dan Wilkinson to chat about all things planning. So before we start, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're involved in adventure sports, Dan?
I live in the Lake District in England, and I've been involved in adventure sports professionally since the age of 17. I started out teaching kayaking on the canal in London, and then rapidly moved around the country, developed a love for whitewater kayaking, moved to North Wales at some point, and also developed a love for mountaineering. I'm fortunate enough now to be qualified both as a winter mountaineering and climbing instructor, which is an MIC in old money, and a British canoe and whitewater kayak coach. So I spend all my time outdoors, whether that's for personal enjoyment or taking other people out to enjoy these really cool places we go to. And I figured that planning was something that is integral to everything we do, whether it's participant or coach. So it had real relevance to us here in this podcast that you guys are so expertly managing.
Very well done, Dan. Very well done. Great. So I guess, a good place to start for us is that, when we think about having a plan, especially in an adventure sports setting, what is it we mean by that? Because it seems like a simple question, but I guess it can mean different things to different people depending on what their intentions are.
Yeah, so I guess if I'm just thinking of going out on an adventure myself, then I'll make sure that I've made quite a comprehensive plan. We'll get into more detail about that. So I'm thinking about what I'm going to expect, what's happened before, and all those different factors that will affect my planning process that will then affect my judgment and decision making about where I go and when I go. And then from a coaching point of view, I probably plan in a slightly different way depending on what type of coaching I'm undertaking at that time. So we've got a few different concepts that we'll explore around what I do as a coach, which might differ to what I do as a participant, I guess.
So do you have a structure that you use, or is there a predetermined way you think about your planning, given either of those two topics, either just for personal trips and expeditions or for your coaching?
Yeah, let's explore personal trips, days out, adventures first. So one of the things that we really want to make sure that I'm incorporating in my planning after several failed epics with my friends, most notably my wife, Kate, is to make sure that what we're going to go and try and do matches what we both want to be doing that day rather than just my own agenda. That's really important. I mean, I remember taking Kate on to Helvellyn in winter, and it was the first time she'd ever worn crampons, and obviously thought that going up Striding Edge, which is a grade 1 winter climb, was the most appropriate thing to do that day, which obviously wasn't, and became apparent when Kate was in tears halfway up Striding Edge. Now that was not a good plan. So I guess developing on from that, I started thinking about what is it we're actually wanting to do and what matches the people that we're going out to do it with. So I've been fortunate enough to go paddling with Nick quite a lot, out at Penryn and places, which is entirely appropriate for us to go. And that sort of thing, because of the level of experience we both have, we can just go and arrange a meeting time and turn up and crack on with it with the amount of experience that we've got between us, that's appropriate for us to be doing. Whereas if I'm going to take a family group out for the day, or I'm going to go for a walk with my mum, I'm going to make sure that where I'm taking my mum walking is really nice, it's gentle, it's flat, and it's got a tea shop halfway along and a pub at the end, because that's what my mum would enjoy. So I guess what I'm getting to is to think about what we're trying to achieve by going out in the first place before we even start thinking about where we're going or what we're going to do. Are we looking to just go out for a lovely time and enjoy ourselves, or are we looking to go out and be challenged slightly, either by the environment or the activity we're doing? And from that, I can then start thinking about where I want to go and what I want to do while I'm doing it.
Yeah, I've been listening with interest, Dan, to your opening remarks about reminding ourselves of the importance of being clear about our motivations and the ways in which we would describe having a good day out. And I've noticed that I'm very mindful of that when I'm working with my clients. If I'm heading over to the west coast of Anglesey to meet a group of clients, as much as I'm thinking about the weather forecast and so on, much of my thoughts are around what would make a productive day that would be aligned with their goals, their aims, their experience, and so on. And I've noticed that I have to more actively remind myself of that dimension if I'm getting into the excitements of planning an adventure in my own time. I think that emotional content that we sometimes bring is important, it's necessary. And as much as we enjoy our working lives, we can more easily remember the professional responsibility that we've got to our clients. So naturally, we put them first. And the anecdote you just told, I was thinking of that myself this morning because Kelly and I went for a climb. There is a venue we can use within 5 miles of the house, ish. And before we left the house to go climbing, we had a chat about what it was that we were, each of us, thinking we were going to get out of the experience. Because it's one thing to go climbing, but that covers a broad range of experiences. And we agreed that we each had some pretty well-aligned goals, and the venue we'd go to would ideally permit us to feel comfortable but feel challenged as much as we wish to. And that led us to ruling out one or two options, and then to rule in a couple of venues, one of which we chose. So yeah. As you were talking about some principles, I was drawn to today, and how important it was for us to get that bit right.
I think that's really important from our coaching perspective, but also from just going out with people. We think about 4 different motivational factors that might influence people, being to either enjoy a new activity or challenge, or to embed some learning or performance, to explore new ideas or environments, or to excel in their chosen discipline when we think about coaching. And taking each of those different motivational factors needs a slightly different approach to our planning, because that's going to affect where we go with those people and what we do with them. And we can do that personally with our group of friends, or we can do that professionally when we're working in a coaching context.
That's a really good way to package it. Go on, just take us through those 4 again. I was busy thinking about the first one, and then you got to the end of the list. So go on, tell me again.
So we might be just looking to enjoy ourselves, either a new activity or challenge, or just to go for a nice pootle around and a gentle paddle with you around Trada Bay would be a nice example of enjoying myself out. To embed some learning or performance. So I might have had a coaching episode with you, and then I'm like, I want to go and practice that again. So I'm just looking to embed that, or to explore a new concept or an environment. So maybe going down and around, going out to go around the Skerries might be exploring a new environment from a sea kayaking thing, or going up onto the north face of Ben Nevis in a winter climbing context. I might have only climbed in the northern corries around Cairngorm. Going onto the Ben is an entirely different proposition, or to excel in our chosen activity. So I guess from my perspective, that's things like going on these expeditions where we've done first descents in places like Peru and Kenya, or going off ski touring in the Lingen Alps.
All right. Yeah, great. There you go. Got it. Thanks.
And I guess all those 4 areas still fall into that, having some shared objectives, doesn't it? Because that's part of the conversation that we'd have with either friends or with clients or students about which one or in what order those 4 things might happen. Are there any challenges when we come to having the conversations about what those shared objectives are that you've found in the past?
I think the biggest challenge that we have is just being open and honest with people around what we're looking to do, especially given the if I've gone from here up to Scotland, and then I've gone with my friend, and it turns out we get all the way up to Scotland and we've both got different motivations for being there, then that becomes a challenge. And we normally don't end up talking about them until we're already at the venue or about to start the journey or something. which either causes conflict or one of you has to compromise and doesn't exactly get what you want. So I'm now much more open, and I think it's taken me a long time to become open with people. It's definitely a skill about what it is that I'm looking to do that day, especially given I've now got a 4-month-old daughter, so my opportunity to go out in my own time is probably a little bit more limited than it has been previously.
Do you think it's a trap you fall into because it's two friends or it's peers going, and maybe you wouldn't do that if you were spending a day with clients because you bring a different mindset to it? Do you reckon that's something that happens?
Oh, definitely, without a question of a doubt. I think the underlying thing there that's intrinsic to us is that we just assume everyone else is doing it for the same purposes. I was working my way through my MIA, which is now called Mountaineering Climbing Instructor Award. So I was trying to tick all these big, long mountain routes off. And Kate, as my long-suffering adventure buddy, gets to come along with me. And her motivations for coming out were to have a nice day with me rather than to get 2 or 3 VS grade routes done. And so when I'm trying to squeeze in an extra route in the sun's setting, she's looking at her watch and thinking about maybe getting down the pub to see our mates before it's closing time.
I'm remembering a day out with Adam last summer. We went scrambling in the glidders. Adam suggested that we make the most of the good weather. And so we made our way up the edge of the Idle slabs and over the Cunliffe arête, and then we dropped down into the area below the north, those north-facing buttresses on Gliddervac, and I think we went up Dolman Ridge. And as we got to the top of Gliddervac, I thought, this has been a great day out. And I was starting to think about going for a beer. Adam looked at me and said, should we descend via Brisley Ridge? Well, that seemed like a good idea as well. And as we reached the col, he then said, come on, let's go over Trevan as well. And I thought, really, Adam, really? We're going to do this as well? So suddenly there I was on the east face of Trevan. We made it to the summit, and to my disbelief, Adam then turned to me and said, if we descend this gully, we can do another scramble on Trevan. And I thought, really, Adam, really? And then the reality of the situation became quite apparent to me. This was Adam's precious day away from childcare. And he was going to stay for as long as it took for him to get as many of his favourite scrambles in as he could. For me, I could go the next day. I was quite ready to go and have a beer and have a rest and maybe do it again tomorrow. But there wasn't a tomorrow for Adam. And as it happened, I was very pleased to join him in his adventures. But I could imagine on another occasion, he might have encountered more resistance from me. And you know what? We didn't talk about it at the start of the day. We didn't have a consensus about what the extent and the limit of our adventures would be. So my only solution at the end of the day was to get some revenge on him by insisting that we run from Little Trevan back to Ogwen as a final exercise. And he didn't like that. Anyway, there you go. I don't think that's advanced the discussion at all, but it's kind of aligned with your previous anecdote.
I think that for me has now become a much more of a starting point for my discussions with people that I'm going to go out with in my own time. If I'm minded of another time when we were up in Scotland working in winter and popped up to the Ben, and it was exactly the same sort of thing. I was like, it was my rest day, so we just went and I thought we'd do a quick route, get down into the fort, have a cup of coffee and enjoy ourselves for the afternoon. And my friend who I was out with wanted to do a second route, which on the Ben is a little bit more of a proposition than just ticking off another one down the Clanbarris Pass on a rock climbing day out. So yeah, you normally just go along for the ride because we enjoy being out so much anyway, don't we? But it is important, and I think even more so now I'm trying to be really clear about what I'm looking to get out that experience with those people before I kind of commit my plans any further towards thinking about where we're going or what we're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've found it a little easier as the years have gone by because I've become a lot more mellow about what I think a good day out might look like, and I realise that my range of activities on a given day can be quite broad and they can give me quite a lot of satisfaction. But I can recall with specific activities at certain times in my life I would get very focused to achieve what I perceived were important goals for the day, but they weren't necessarily aligned with every other member in the party. So I think I've learned the hard way over the time to just make sure that we have that discussion that you've alluded to. Openness is important, isn't it? Being clear, even about our own objectives and goals, and to ask myself the question, what is it that I'm hoping to get out of this experience, whether it's a few hours, a few days, or even a few weeks of expedition time.
So what makes, it might be a question that's difficult to answer, but what makes for a good plan? What are the sort of considerations that we put in place for generating that good plan?
I guess for me, it starts with that understanding motivational factors and then thinking about what we could do that's based around those motivational factors and the logistical factors of the resources we've got available to us that fit in with that. So I'm really fortunate. I live about 3 minutes walk from the River Kent, and I can jump on and go for a quick blast in an evening or something. A lot of people might have to travel from places like London or the South Coast to come up to go whitewater kayaking. So and then finding people to share your fuel with and all those sort of things. We need to think very carefully about who we're going with. It becomes a big part of that. But then those other logistical constraints that we really need to have a little bit more knowledge about in our environments for our adventure sports like adventure sports in general. So I'm minded of things like thinking about what's happened before in the environment. So if I'm going to go paddling in Scotland for a week, I'm going to start looking at the rainfall a week beforehand so I understand how saturated the ground is. Because a brief shower onto saturated ground will bring rivers up quickly. Whereas if it's been dry for a whole week, then that little bit of rainfall is not going to make it affect our rivers. And it's so much easier nowadays with all these online gauges and information. But I remember driving around the lakes for donkeys when I was a student up here, trying to find a river to paddle that had some water in, because we had no clue what we were doing. We were just kind of like it's Tuesday, let's go kayaking, without any consideration for what the environment had been doing the week before. So adding in, once we've got our motivation and kind of those logistical factors, what the environment's been doing previously before we start thinking about where we're going to go, and those like finite details is really important.
I agree. And thinking about an activity I've enjoyed doing in my free time, if it was a winter that I knew was going to give me the opportunity to visit the Alps for ski touring goals, I would get very interested early winter in the patterns of snowfall, temperature changes, and even if I wasn't able to visit that part of the world, I would do my best to educate myself about snow stability so that when I arrived in my chosen area, I had the beginnings of an idea of what might be possible, what the limitations would be. I found if I disregarded that information source and then tried to catch up with my knowledge during the few days before my trip, I'd find it almost impossible to build my awareness of what the opportunities were going to be like when I got to, for example, the Chamonix Valley.
Yeah, that's really where I was going to take that whole plan thing next. So we've kind of identified some logistics about where we can go and the sort of things we might like to try. And then we start focusing a little bit more on what it is that's actually relevant for us to go and do on that day at that time. And that's so relevant in winter. I think there's so much that I've learned from doing things in winter that I've transferred into my whitewater kayaking and the planning process. So the avalanche thing, like rule one of Avalanche Club is don't get avalanched, right? In order to not get avalanched, that there's a lot that we have to take into account before we even get on the ground on that day. It's not just a case of avoiding those slopes on that day at that time. So the Scottish Avalanche Information Service have got a fantastic resource where they talk about planning before you go rather than planning on the day as you're going. So they think so much about planning at home in the weeks, days and hours before we even set out. So for those of you who don't know anything about avalanches, they put out an avalanche forecast every day, which in winter in every alpine region, including Scotland, that says on these aspects and at these altitudes, there's a various hazard that you might get avalanche, the various, I guess, luck really. If you don't look at that bit of information and you walk on that, you may or may not get avalanched. So we think about our planning, and then there's no journey in the winter that's the same. So on every day, I'm going to be walking on various different aspects and at various different altitudes of a mountain. And so thinking about, before I've left home, which of those aspects and altitudes are dangerous, potentially, for me to go onto? What am I going to base my decisions on when I get there as to whether I carry on or whether I come home? Because coming home at the end of the day is the most important thing in our all adventure sports. You know, it's only a sport. We're doing it for fun. You know, so breaking down your route journey that you're about to undertake and think, well, this is a bit more of a hazardous environment. I need to be just up my level of awareness here and make a decision based on some different factors that I can preload before I've got into that environment is really important in winter. And I now transfer that sort of thinking to my whitewater kayaking. So if I'm going out to do something hard, I'm starting to think about, well, what would make me run that particularly hard rapid on a day or not? So is the water levels perfect for it? Is there a new hazard in that rapid and all these things, rather than just mega training down a river and hoping that it's exactly the same as it was the last time I went out? And they call this key decision points. So on our route, we're just identifying before we've left home what these key decision points are going to be, and then thinking about what might affect our decision making when we got to them. So we've front loaded ourselves to make an accurate decision rather than a gut feeling instinctive decision in the environment.
Like you say, there's comparisons that can be drawn. You know, if you spend a day on the sea, then, you know, the amount of preparation and planning that goes into, you know, taking a group out into a tidal environment is the same, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can draw parallels between the two. I find that the time I have available before I arrive at a venue and before I meet a group is extremely valuable to me. And we've had some recent discussions around decision-making, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to consider the information sources that will be relevant to my planning. For example, the evening before I commit to a trip in local waters, and certainly again early the next morning before I'm under pressure to leave the house and go and meet my team. Because I think the time available there gives me a better opportunity to look closely at the available information, maybe to employ some analytical decision-making processes, because it's so much harder to do that when we're in the moment and we arrive at a headland. We've got dynamic water around us, and there are time pressures that are inherent in the day, not least the group looking at you, waiting for you to make a decision. I find it's much harder to delve into the detail of the available information at that point. So I try to do it at times in the day before I get too closely committed to the next decision. And Dan was just referring to decision points there. I think my days in the outdoors, especially in sea kayaking, are made up of a series of decision points that are often identifiable geographically: the next headland, the next inlet, the next bay. And I try to break down my day into a series of identifiable decision points where, even if I'm not obliged to change my plan, at least I recognize that it's a moment where the opportunity arises.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about it from a work perspective. So some of the recent research that's come out of UCLan, and that is identifying the fact that professional adventure sports coaches tend to have this concept of a straw man plan before they leave the house, or when they're meeting their clients and they've done a little bit of information gathering. So it's not just the sort of, it's going to incorporate things like what venues we might go to with that group before we've met them, or what we might be working on, or the theme for the day before we've met the clients and seen how they're doing and what their behaviours are like actually on the water and stuff. And then as we carry on, we kind of put some flesh on that straw man plan to focus our coaching in a more detailed and precise way. But we're not leaving the house with a very definite plan of what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, and how we're going to teach it, because that's really dangerous in our environments. because it doesn't give us the opportunity to change our minds if we've stuck to this plan. And there's a load of stuff that comes out of biases about whether or not we believe that if we've made a formal plan before we've left the house and it's really formalized and it's like we do this here, then for 20 minutes we do this, and then we do this, you tend to get really wedded to that plan in your mind. And then that being wedded to that plan means that you're not able to rationally look at it and change it if the environment needs it or the clients need it, which is one of the key things that we should be doing as adventure sports coaches, is matching the environment and the clients together, really.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dan. I found myself thinking about my working environment for a moment as a coach, as a Kayak coach. The clients and the students that I work with are generally there to develop their experience and often their decision-making skills in that environment. And so if I bring an open and questioning approach to my interactions, there's a common understanding that we're doing it for purposes of enhancing our understanding together. And it's okay for me to ask a question in that environment. And it's become a style of planning that I've become very familiar with, and I guess it's my default these days. And I was reflecting on it recently when I enter a different world as a sea kayak guide. Sometimes I can be out with clients who aren't expecting me to take such an inclusive questioning approach. And I realized on one occasion last year that it was being perceived by group members as a form of indecision. And they began to question my certainty about what I was doing in that environment. And it took me quite some time to realize that that's what was happening. Because in my world, I was asking questions and inviting contributions because I wanted everyone to share in the collective understanding of what we were going to do. And I realized that my life would have been an awful lot easier that week if I'd taken a much more directive style and told people what was going to happen. But I don't like getting committed to a plan because I can take a flexible approach, but if the group perceive that the plan is the thing we follow, well, we're starting to go down a dangerous road of group members assuming that what we discussed the previous evening is exactly what's going to happen the next day. It was a lesson for me. Let's put it that way.
That could be also linked to that first point that you made, Dan, about having those kind of shared objectives for what's going on, and I wonder if they see the person who's in charge, like you said, Nick, just as a guide, well then they just want to be on the train and kind of come with you for the journey, and you're going to make all those choices. So do you, either of you think that involving your students or your clients in that planning and preparation, the decision making, do you think it's stuff that they can learn from, or is it just so they're part of that decision at that moment? Can they go away after spending time with you and add that to their little planning database or toolbox?
I think again it's going to come back to those clients for that what their motivation is for being involved. If they're come up from London for a weekend and they just want to get some really cool photos for their Instagram feed of them in really rad places in the Lake District Mountains, then I'm just going to take them to really rad places in the Lake District Mountains and try and avoid some of our classic West Coast weather that we get here as much as possible. Whereas if they're looking to become independent hill walkers or mountaineers or rock climbers or whatever the work is that we're doing, then I'm going to start off right from the start of their learning journey with me to be thinking about what we're making decisions on before we leave the house, what we're making decisions on when we're out on the ground, and then reflecting back on those decisions after the day out. And it's just matching those motivations of those people to the day that we're going to have, I think, or the experience we're going to have together.
Nope, that seems to make sense, doesn't it? I guess it just depends which hat you wear and depends on how you're gonna approach it. It's kind of quite common, I suppose, across all those different adventure sports that you have. It's just, like you say, it's just about meeting their needs in that moment. And I guess you sometimes get clients or students that come along and they just want decisions to be made. And then as the day or the week goes by, they start getting a bit more interested in the planning and the preparation element and start asking questions and exploring, why you're doing the things that you're doing. So I guess there can be a bit of an evolution as even maybe a day goes by, but definitely as a week-long trip goes by, where they start getting more interested in how the plans are occurring.
Yeah, and people's motivations change daily, probably. If they think, I want to try sea kayaking for a week, and they book a week with the excellent people at Kayak Essentials, and then about halfway through that week, they start thinking, actually, this is something that not only am I enjoying this week, but I'm going to want to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to start finding out more, and then we might change our approach as a coach to match those people. And that's where our flexibility as coaches is essential.
Yeah, and while we've been discussing this, I recognise that we're bringing our perspectives as coaches to the discussion. I'm well aware that some of the people listening to this podcast will be recreational paddlers who might even be giving up some of their precious free time at weekends to look after less experienced club members. And one or two of them have been asking us questions about how they could effectively plan their adventures. And I often feel that we have an easier time of it because frequently goals are relatively well aligned within groups that have committed to a particular training course. Guided weeks are often structured so that there's an understood framework of conditions in which we're going to go and enjoy our chosen activity. And I think in club environments, it can be the case that there's a more diverse range of objectives, experience levels, perceptions of what a good day out might look like. Kind of brings us back to the earlier part of this conversation.
I think it also links to, I think you said before, then you said about being honest and having being honest about what you want and where your abilities are, and also people who are taking responsibility for you, whether that's on a voluntary basis or, a more professional paid for basis, saying to them, well, this is what I want, and then them being able to be honest with the people that they're with and saying, well, maybe what you want and what you need may be two different things. And I think sometimes the challenge and the problem comes when especially in a voluntary setting, everyone wants to be inclusive, so they end up allowing everyone to come along for the ride, and sometimes maybe that wasn't the best way of thinking about it. But I think it's a tough challenge, like you say. We often get people who come to us and say, this is what I want to do, and then we can match what they want to do, maybe with the venue that we choose or the activities that we take them on. So I think it's a real tough challenge, especially in things like clubs, for them to be able to manage that well. So it's a tough job they've got there.
I also I think one of the ways that you can address that is by setting out clear aims for the trips before you leave. So it's like, we're just heading up to the Lake District for the weekend, and we are going to paddle some Grade 2 rivers. Is a really sort of like, this is a clear objective that we're going to try and achieve, which comes onto that kind of backwards and forwards. It's like in our planning process, what are our motivations and what are our goals are the two things that we really should be considering when we think about where we're going and what we're going to do on those days, trip, whatever it is. So I've been on a couple of trips where I've had very clearly defined goals of doing a first descent, and I've been on a couple of trips with my friends where I've just gone, let's just go to Switzerland and see what's in good condition to kayak on at the moment. They're both really valuable and valid ways of approaching the planning process, but when we've got really clearly defined goals that we share as a team, before we leave, and even if I'm a bag Grade 5 paddler or whatever, and I go, I'm going on a Grade 2 paddling trip, great, I know in advance what I'm signing up for and what I'm committing myself to and my time. And then that, I think, hopefully smooths out a lot of those ripples that we're talking about, where different people have different objectives and different agendas that might be hidden from everyone else, kind of driving their behaviours and kind of going, I don't really want to paddle this river. Whereas you're like, well, this is the only really good Grade 2 river, and this is our objective, so that's what we're going to get on with.
Yeah, I think what I was reaching out for earlier a concrete example of that. Matt, our friends Dave and Fee, who run river trips for their paddling club, I took a look at some pre-trip information that they'd sent to their club members, and it was a model of clarity. It was excellent. Their chosen river, they could assess the river level via the online gauge, and they could also visually check it out on the day in question. They gave a rendezvous to the group members, but they emphasized that wouldn't necessarily be the put-in. That was simply a place they were going to meet. They ruled out one section of river on the basis that it didn't match the stated aims of the trip, which were made very clear, the ability level that people needed to have in order to come along that day. And they also ruled out that section because they made the statement that as leaders, they weren't able to take responsibility for people on that type of water. So that immediately took away a degree of uncertainty for people who were deciding to go that day. They also stated that according to river levels, they would consider one of two different river sections. And if the river was above a certain level, that wouldn't guarantee that they would get on a particular river section, but it would guarantee that they would not get on another river section. And having read the guidance that they sent to their club members, it seems to me to be an excellent way of providing clarity for everybody so that there were aligned expectations before they met in the car park on that Sunday morning.
And that sounds great. I wish I was in that club. But I think that what's really interesting to listen to there is the fact that they're saying that this is their kind of main goal, but they've got some alternative backup plans. They've obviously spent their time planning, thinking, if X happens, then I'm actually going to go and do Y. And that's that link all the way back to our slow time decision-making, analytical decision-making that we talked about right at the top. Because one of the things that comes out a lot of avalanche education and has come into this whole chat about heuristic traps and our thinking biases that I noticed you guys have done a couple of blogs about is this idea that if we leave our home with a fixed objective, then we're much more likely, again, to feel wedded to that objective and ignore the changes in the environment that mean that we probably shouldn't be going towards that, which is where all this avalanche education and planning stuff came from, with that whole work that they did about heuristic traps. So like being analytical with this is kind of a good area we could go to, these are good aspects we can go on to, all the way through to this is a key decision point, and these are considerations that I'm going to make sure I'm balancing. Really, really important.
I'm reminded of a friend of mine, Sean, who lives in San Francisco. He's a British paddler, and 16 years ago he was making his way around Great Britain and Ireland as a solo sea kayaker. His name's Sean Morley, and I was chatting with him about the risk assessment process that he went through prior to embarking on that trip. And he knew that during the course of that summer, in order to complete his journey, there would be several significant open crossings that he would have to do, some of which were 30 or 40 miles in length. And he knew that within the expedition, he was likely to be tired, stressed, committed to the goal. And he knew that immediately prior to embarking on one of those crossings, he wouldn't be necessarily in the best frame of mind to engage in detailed analytical decision-making. So as part of his risk assessment, he wrote down wind directions and wind strengths that would rule out those open crossings, and he would not leave from his departure point until certain elements, certain environmental elements were in place. And he said he found it extremely useful because when he arrived at those moments in the expedition, he could turn to his notes that he'd written down with the luxury of time, sitting at his kitchen table months earlier, and he could say, look at that, I told myself that if the wind was, for example, blowing 15 knots from the southeast, I wasn't going to leave. And it shortcut the decision-making process for him, and it gave him useful heuristics that he was able to use in a positive way as part of his overall trip.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a good example. Coming back to your Fiona and Dave, I've seen them put pictures, because they lead people on the sea as well, and I've seen them put pictures of them in the cafe saying, actually, it turned out today the conditions that we thought were going to be the case actually weren't the case. And I guess because they've got those structures in place beforehand, it also helps them, because they then say, right, we said we're going to do this, and this is not what this is. So, you know what, we're not going to do it. They're not feeling the pressure from the group to go, well, you said we were going to come here, and we've made that drive from Liverpool or Manchester, wherever it is, to Anglesey, and then there starts becoming a bit of pressure to get things done. And if you've got those pre-established, I don't want to call them rules, but that structure beforehand, then it's good for everybody, including the people who are responsible. But that's a really good example, I think, the Sean one of in the moment saying, right, yeah, I had the time and space to think about this. So these are a set of protocols for me when I feel like this. Yeah, I really like that.
I'm minded of another time when I've had to make decisions not to go to places where we've not had the luxury or foresight to do so in a sort of an analytical approach. So we were in Peru aiming to do a first ascent of a river. We'd flown over to Peru, we told our sponsors we were going to go and do these first ascents. We were going to make a little film about it, all these different things that, that were important to us on that trip. And we drove up to get into the river. We drove to 4,000 and something meters, and then we were walking down the drainage. We met our porters that had been arranged, and they're like, yes, it's a 2-day walk. So we're like, right, great, it's 2 days, and then it's about 30k of white water. No one's ever done it before, so we'll take 4 days worth of food. So we walked down for a day with our porters carrying our boats and some mules taking all our kit, and us just having a lovely time. And get there, and only when we got to that camp did it transpire that the path we were meant to then follow the next day to walk down to where we thought we'd be able to navigate the river from in our boats, had been washed away by landslides, and they thought that it would actually take 3 or 4 days for us to walk from that point to the riverhead. Now, if we're thinking about making pressured decisions, that was a pressured decision. We've dropped 700 meters in altitude and walked for a whole day with only 4 days worth of food based on the information that we had. And now we're being told that actually this thing that we've traveled halfway around the world for probably isn't that much of a reality as a result of this. And there was a team of 4 of us, and we went round in circles for a little while about what to do. Did we think we should carry on? Did we think we should walk out? Were they just trying it to get more money? If we just offered them more money, would they walk faster? And then we'd actually get there the next day, sort of thing. And it left when we'd done all the planning that we should have done to be there, we looked at everything. We had Google Earth imagery of the river and worked out gradient profiles and all sorts of stuff. And yet we just felt like there was too many unknowns that had been introduced into the planning process to carry on with that safely, because as always, the first rule is come home. So it was a very unmotivated team of people that got up the next morning to walk back up to 4,000 meters with our kayaks and try to arrange a jeep by sat phone from the Peruvian Andes, to then leave and go back to Cusco to kind of lick our wounds and restart our planning process of our main objective of our trip having been taken away from us so early on.
Go on, what did you learn from it?
You can't plan for every eventuality. That by having, at the very least, we were all on the same page with the fact that we wanted, coming home is the most important thing. We felt some commitment to sponsors and people that, like Piranha, shipped our boats to Peru for us. That's not a great return on their investment, is it? But at the same time, we're like, well, we're just here to have a good time, to do some exploring, and there's bound to be a consolation prize that we can go and enjoy. strangely enough, pretty much the same thing, but in a very different format happened to me last year when I went to Nepal with my friends. In that we got to some Nepal Ganj is the armpit of Nepal, I think I'll refer to it as. So I won't use any stronger language, but it's not somewhere I would recommend you add to your sightseeing places. So we travelled overland to Nepal Ganj to save a few $100 to then fly up to go and do a river. It's called the Humna Canali, that's really famous. And getting to Nepal Ganj Airport, where I've been assured several times that there was a card machine we could use to pay the $400 each for our excess boat baggage to fly up the valley. This card machine didn't exist, and then it turned into, it had to be cash. Now, trying to get US dollars in the armpit of Nepal is an impossible task, it turns out. So once again, we're licking salt from our wounds and retreating back to have try and come up with a second plan. But these are all parts of undertaking a venture. You know, the outcome is uncertain, and it might be that the same thing could happen here if I drove up to Scotland for a weekend winter climbing and it was raining all weekend. I guess I've got the luxury here of looking at a weather forecast before I leave.
How much can we plan for trips and expeditions, you know, in the run up to it? Is there a danger that we over plan for it, or is getting the maximum amount of information exactly what we should be doing?
I think it depends on what the objective is of that trip. You know, again, if we go all the way back to the plan, it sounds like your friends come up with this is our ideal, but then we've got a couple of alternatives. If you go on a trip with those sort of things in your back pocket, then you're kind of laughing when you get there and plan A doesn't work. You can just revert to plan B or plan C, and everyone's kind of happy with that. And as an objective, as a shortcut, I mean, we managed to paddle the Tuliberry, which is the other classic river on that side of the country. So it's not a bad consolation prize, that, by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not exactly what we'd set out to do. So there was obviously a little bit of disappointment, but still, you know, we knew that the Tuliberry was over that side, and if we had issues, we could go and do that instead. So that as a planning tool, I think is really important for an expedition. I think the more of the things we can plan for expeditions is making sure our kit works. Like, you don't want to get there and then find out your stove's broken or something like that. They're the things that, you know, the detail is much more important than the big picture, I think, for a big trip like that, which sounds a little bit the wrong way around. But if you've taken away all those little things and you can just think about the big picture rather than trying to think about my stove doesn't work and I can't get on the river at the same time.
Well, that strikes me as an example of elements that can lie within our complete control that we don't necessarily want to be giving processing power to in the moment. And to take the equipment example, if we've taken the time to ensure that the kit that we're using is absolutely reliable, and I'm reminding myself of hard-earned lessons in my ski touring experience when elements of my equipment became not only an issue for me in the day, but they drew my attention to the need to fix a problem with my binding that I probably could have dealt with before I left the valley. And in the moment, it felt like I was just compromising my safety because of an equipment concern, but actually I was compromising my safety in other ways by turning my attention away from environmental concerns and thinking about what was attached to my ski boot. And I can recall one or two occasions when I thought to myself afterwards that I'd really better make sure that I've completely mastered my equipment needs so that I can give all my attention to the really important stuff around me. As a human being, I often have to learn these things through trial and error. And I was thinking about your experience in Nepal there and how difficult it must have been to retreat from your objective when the circumstances had changed. And again, you know, like as humans, we're very, very driven to be consistent in our decision making. And you'd already made a whole series of decisions to go to that part of the world, to commit to the journey, to get to the top of the watershed, and then to walk down to the point where, in theory, you're going to start the river trip. And it's that much harder to turn you back on your goal at that point, because we've got all kinds of issues like sunk costs. You've put so much effort to get in there in the first place. Logic and a dispassionate approach to decision making would very easily lead you to the conclusion that better not continue. But it's hard in that moment, isn't it? Because of all of the pressures that you feel as a result of the investment that you've made and the desire to commit to your self-identity as first descent type whitewater kayakers. Must have been a big deal to turn around and go back uphill.
Yeah, I mean, it's given me a good story to tell in the pub, but not much else to show for it. So, yeah, and it's still something that we wrestle with now. I still look back and think, oh, maybe we could have got away with it. But then I think, again, I then reflect on those reflections and think getting away with it probably isn't the best attitude to have when it comes to risk. You know, we don't engage in our activities to get away with things. We engage in our activities to control the risk and to engage with the environment that we go into in a respectful manner, not just thinking I can deal with anything it throws at me. You know, it's making the right choices. But yeah, still a slight sour taste in my mouth, and I wonder whether I need to go back to Peru. The kayaks are still over there somewhere. So,
final thing before we move on to some questions from our Essential members. You mentioned about when things got a bit tough and you had to make some choices and things were going a bit wrong, that it was good that you could rely on the people around you and the way that they would have some shared ideas and they would bring their experience to it. So how important are those kind of group dynamics when we're engaging in expeditions and trips?
To me, they're everything about the trip. You know, the activity, and I think that definitely comes from my background as a participant before becoming a coach as well. Is the activity to me is secondary to the people that I go on these adventures with. I might have given you a different answer 10 years ago, for sure. But now I think about the shared times, and like the people I was with on that trip, Pete Cattrall and I, we had a fantastic time just taking the mick out of each other for 3 weeks and 5 days worth of kayaking in Nepal, or whatever it was we ended up managing. And we still had a great time on that trip. I could imagine that if I was with some people that weren't as resilient or as much fun for me to be around, I'm not saying everyone has to get on with everyone, but that weren't as much fun for me to be around, then I think that we would have had a very different trip. And that goes down to being on the water with these people as well, doesn't it? Or in the mountains. We need to trust our friends that we're with, that they're not only would have our backs, but they're also making the same decisions that we would make. And one of the big things I've changed in my approach is I'm much more open about talking about the decisions that I think we need to make as a collective as we approach decision-making points. I'm minded of a time when we were over in the Lingen Alps, and a friend of mine was really keen to ski this thing called the godmother of all couloirs, which is a huge 1,000-metre long couloir that's about 45 degrees the whole way. And the first day we got there, it snowed about a foot. So obviously, avalanche risk is quite high. We left it a couple of days for it to settle. We probably missed our opportunity in that day. And then the next day, there was then wind blowing a load of snow into the top. And we're like, well, we've missed the opportunity to do that. And we're all there kind of staring in at it going, it'd probably be all right though, wouldn't it? And it probably would be all right. But again, we're all on the same page that it's about having a nice time and challenging ourselves in an appropriate manner rather than taking risks that we can't control. But yeah, it definitely comes back to those people and having those shared objectives. And that's the same for me if I'm choosing to go away up to Scotland for a weekend, or just to go out for a day trip out somewhere with people locally. I've got to get on with those people as well. Otherwise, I don't feel like I've had a very nice day out at all. It's all been a bit fraught and tense rather than just relaxing and enjoying ourselves, which again comes all the way back to my main purpose for going out now to do these things. It's to enjoy myself and to personally, or to enjoy myself working.
This is a question for both of you. You've done a lot of trips where let's call them working trips, where you've been leading or guiding people. So are there any tips for dealing with situations where those kind of group dynamics start to break down? How do you look to try and improve those things, or do you just say, well, this is part of the process and let them get on?
I think there's a couple of classical things that we talk about in outdoor education, where we think about the formation of a group involves some form of storming process where people start to fall out with each other before we then agree some values and things. one of the things that I try to do now, and I do with some work that I do, is set out just some, it's like, they call it contract setting in the outdoors, but we just set out the sort of behaviours that we would expect from each other, and and again, preload this decision-making process. So if it starts to get a little bit fraught, we've got something we can refer back to, rather than just trying to deal with it there and then when emotions and tensions are running higher. And that's a really valuable tool, I think, as a coach, as a leader in all these environments. It's like, I agree to do this if you agree to do that, and then we'll find a middle way together if these two things can't be met.
Yeah, they're quite, I know in my my experience in the outdoors, working in outdoor centres, then setting out those, like you use the word contract, which is what they get called, isn't it? It's not that formal, I suppose, but you're just getting everyone on the same page, aren't you? This is the way it's going to be, and then if troubles come up, you're right. It's an anchor, it's a reference point to go back to, isn't it?
Sorry, Matthew. I jumped in a bit quickly there. There's an exercise I do with my sea kayaking clients that might be related to this question. We discuss the challenges of being too wedded to a plan, and to have too little flexibility within our planning. And of course, there's the issue of pride of ownership when we've put some effort in the previous evening to creating our expected conditions. We've got our weather forecast and our tidal picture, and by the time the next morning arrives, a certain degree of pride can develop as to the quality of the plan. And one game we sometimes play before departing is to literally put the plan on the table, and whoever's been holding it at that point relinquishes ownership of it and says, okay, it's no longer my plan, it's our plan, or it's nobody's plan. Let's take a look at it. And the question I ask of everybody is, well, let's imagine that we enact this plan flawlessly, that we do the things that this plan requires of us. What could still nevertheless go wrong for us? What problems could we nevertheless encounter? And then it gets really interesting, because people say, well, we might have a problem with some equipment, or somebody might fall in and we've got to go to that beach and fix it, and time might pass, and it might be that the tides are doing something different because we're later returning into the bay, and so on. And it starts to focus people's minds on the situations that might arise and might develop. We also get to explore the type of activities that people wish to engage in during the day. So if we're going to go around a headland, how long do we think we're going to spend there before we proceed or retreat from that point? And I think it links to something we've been talking about earlier, where there are times when you have opportunity to discuss, and in the moment when there's time pressure in the outdoors and you're faced with a particular situation, that's often the hardest moment for us to engage in complex group dynamics, where we're trying to make sure everyone has a voice and we figure out what people really want to do in that moment. So I try to front load it at the start of a day by way of exploration, in terms of figuring out what might go wrong, and then we have a discussion around that.
Mm-hmm. So like you say, there's a shared ownership of what's happening. No one's pointing fingers going, well, you made this plan. Actually, I'm part of any problems that happen. I'm part of it as well.
What you've done there is describe situational awareness, basically. So you're starting to get people to notice the things that might occur, so they can start to understand those points on that journey and then predict what might occur, so they can then plan for those predictions. And then obviously the actual situational awareness occurs when we're in those environments. But developing that in clients is something that's really important, and it's very underlooked in adventure sports coaching.
I often invite people to play particular roles in that discussion, and I'll ask somebody to be the optimist and someone else to be the pessimist, another person to try to take an analytical approach to the available information, and someone else to go on gut feeling. And then they can all tell us what they think they're going to experience as we go around the first major headland. We then share those ideas and collectively, as a chair of the group, we say, right, well, what are we going to do? We've had the optimism, we've had the pessimism, we've had the analysis, and we've had the intuition. What's our final decision going to be? And it's often quite revealing, because then we start to lean into our instinctive thought processes and how we prefer to process information, whether we tend to see the likely positive outcomes or whether we catastrophize a little bit. So I've been getting quite a lot of use out of that particular game at the start of Sundays.
Is it then useful to reference that when you reach that point in real life? So you reach that particular headland, and then you can draw comparisons from, sitting around a table to actually what's gone on, and then people can kind of calibrate to the information. Yeah.
Because we're generally discussing the plan that we might at least partially follow during the day. We might at least go to that launch point and see if it's worthwhile getting on the water there. And, we can inject a little bit of humor to the discussion as well. As we arrive at our first major challenge, we all look around, try and remember who the optimist in the group was. Funnily enough, no one wants to take that role. And the question, what could go wrong, suddenly is very apparent for everyone. I'm being slightly flippant in the moment here, but yeah, we do often take that exercise onto the water, and we can play the game at the mouth of a bay or during lunch before we then continue our journey into the afternoon.
Right. It comes back to that question before about whether we can help develop the people who we're working with, help develop their planning and their thinking about it. So I guess sitting around a table is great, but we need to be able to see what that looks like in real life too. Brilliant. Okay. Well, we've got some questions that have been sent in from our Essential members. So are you happy to have a bit of a quick fire round? There is one that's a little bit more interesting than the others, but we've got an easy one to start with, and either one of you can kind of buzz in for this one. But Greg's asked a question. He says, what gear / equipment do you usually carry for emergencies on expeditions? So, for example, first aid kit contents and communication devices. Go on, Dan.
Like when we went to Nepal, we took an InReach, which is a fantastic bit of satellite communication device that you can send text messages through the satellite system, so you're not reliant on mobile phone systems and stuff. So if you're somewhere remote, something like that that's also got a huge help me button on, big red help me button that sends a message to all the grown-ups that will come and help you if you need it, is absolutely essential for being in random places. And then thinking to, like, it comes back to that idea of situational awareness and thinking beforehand, what are the things that might occur that we all need to deal with. So when we went to Nepal, we took a really big repair kit with us. If I'm going whitewater kayaking in Scotland, my repair kit consists of a spare bung, and if anything else is broken, we're walking out, because it's much easier to fix a boat long term back at base. Whereas in Nepal we had welding strips, loads of spare bolts and things, black witch to fix neoprene rips and all sorts of stuff with us. But I would say that the three things that I always carry with me no matter where I'm going would be a first aid kit of some description that's matched to that activity and environment. So I don't always carry a giant first aid kit, but if I'm somewhere in the third world, I've got a lot more with me. And a group shelter is so useful for using as a sail, but also for getting into when I'm home by lunch in the mountains when the weather's a bit poor. And if something does go wrong, I've got something that will keep the environment off us while I start to deal with it and formulate a plan. And then the third bit of key kit is a form of communication. So on the sea, we've got VHF flares and probably our mobile phone as well. In the hills now, we carry a mobile phone. And interestingly, in the Alps, if you're doing any work out there, the guides associations also, you have to carry two forms of communication device with you. So a mobile phone and another one. So in the Chamonix Valley, they all carry radios, like they do in the Northern Corridors, actually, in Glenmore Lodge staff, or elsewhere, people are using those spot satellite messengers. So first aid kit, group shelter, and then something to get help to you with. And obviously the means to tell people where you are. Yeah.
And I guess some of that, one of those kind of preparations for emergencies falls into that planning stage of letting people know where you're going and what you're getting up to, so that you've got shore contact or a home base that is aware of what should be going on. And as a result, if things do get delayed, there's a set of protocols that they can follow just in case. Okay, brilliant. All right. Anything from you, Nick? Yeah, it's the same, isn't it?
I think Dan's probably covered it. The question, was it Greg's question?
It was Greg's question.
It said, what kit do you carry for an emergency? Well, I found on overnight trips that if I carry enough alcohol, I'm more or less guaranteed an emergency. In my sea kayak working life, on Anglesey at least, to reinforce what Dan said, I carry comms. I carry a VHF radio because it's very, very useful in these waters. I carry a tow line so I can move a person or people to a better place. And I carry equipment in my boat that enables me to look after people who would otherwise get cold. If I can keep people warm and I can move them to a better place and I can communicate, then in my Anglesey sea kayaking work, I'm a long way to having fixed the problem.
Brilliant. Great. I hope that answers your question, Greg. We've had a question from Rob, and Rob's keen to hear about any visualization or mental training preparation that can be done prior to trips or expeditions. Go on, Dan. How about you have a go at this one?
So I think there's two things here. What Nick spoke about eloquently before with looking at the route and foreseeing different things that you can do is a really valuable form of mental preparation, I guess, for any sort of trip and environment. And then the other bit of me that leaps out from that from a coaching perspective is perhaps a segue away from this, but mental practice is normally looked at as the rehearsal of a skill or something. So it is a bit different from planning your next actions, but it's practicing the next actions in our own heads, in our own minds. People do this one of two ways. They either picture themselves as if they were looking for an Oculus Rift, one of those VR lenses, so you can see yourself as if you're taking part in the activity. I'm actually putting my hands around my glasses as if I'm wearing an VR headset there. Or you could be looking at yourself as if you're watching it on TV from a third-person point of view. Now, they're really good approaches in aiding skill acquisition because they help us support storage and retrieval of information. But they are linked to our imagery ability. So the first point of call is to think about developing your imagery ability in order to effectively use mental practice. And you can develop your imagery ability by layering on information. So just start off with simple descriptions of the environment and then add to that by thinking about what it might feel like on your paddle blade in that environment, or what the feel might be like underneath your bum when you've got the waves passing underneath you at sea, or any of those things. And then think about the pressure you'll be feeling on different parts of the boat. And you can keep layering these till you've got a really complex picture in your head of different things. So hopefully we've either answered your question by listening to what Nick said a few minutes ago, or thinking a little bit more about specific mental practice for skill development. Yeah,
and I suppose some of those things are transferable to just thinking about how you're going to go through those processes in preparation for, a day trip or a play spot or a multi-day expedition as well. So great. And final question is from James. So stand by for this one. Sorry if you're eating, but James says, I do have a question around what we do with human waste. I've heard conflicting arguments about it being okay to poo below the tide line and let the sea take it, or whether we should bury it or carry it out. He puts, I guess it depends on the ecology of the area and other factors. Likewise with toilet paper. So there you go. Make what you want from that question. But I think he's saying, how does he best go to toilet when he's on expeditions?
James, thanks for the question. There is quite a lot of information available out there via Leave No Trace website, for example, and as sea kayakers, you can also go to, if you're paddling in Scotland, the Scottish Canoe Association has got some really good PDF resources that summarise the approach we could take. A couple of pieces of advice I'd give you. I've been I've had to confront this in my recreational and working life. The number of people we go off and have adventures with can make this a simple issue to resolve or a very complicated one. And I think that if you go off on your trips with large numbers of people, then the question of dealing with human waste is a huge one. If there are 2 or 3 of you, then some of the received advice about going to the tide line towards low tide, burning your toilet paper afterwards. It's all very reasonable advice that individuals and parties of 2 or 3 people can follow. It's much more challenging to take that approach if you find yourself part of a group of 8, 10, 12 people. So it sounds like we're going to have to discuss that as well. Dan, are you able to get me off the hook here with some information?
I'll hook you up here. So I think the biggest thing for us to consider here is the impact we're having on the environment. So if only 2 or 3 of us are going to a place and it's a really remote place on the west coast of Scotland, probably following the leave no trace advice of dig a shallow hole 6 inches deep or so, cutting the turf out properly, dig a shallow hole, go in that hole, but pack your toilet paper out with you and then replace the turf is the best advice that we can follow. If it is a more busy area, and the Cairngorm have got a thing called the Snow White project that's worth looking up, James, specifically for big groups, but it's for everyone. So there's a lot of snow holding goes on in the Cairngorms through the winter months, and then as the snow holes retreat, it transpires that the little treats that are left behind in the snow holes slowly come to the surface and then pollute the watercourse and things. So they've actually provide what they call poo tubes. So you do a little poo in a bag, or you poo and then get it into your little bag, screw the canister onto the top of this airtight container and pack that out with you. And I personally I have done that on several trips now. I think that the impact that we have on the environments we're going into is increasing. We've seen all the pictures that have come out as we've been released from lockdown in the UK of people affecting the environment. And I think that our role as ambassadors for the environment we go into is to try and do everything we can to protect it.
Yeah, depending on where you go in the world, some of these decisions are taken away from you. I'm sure you've been on 1 or 2 river trips, Dan, where the required system is to pack it out, to pack everything out, your human waste, as well as the paper. And I guess when we're away from that kind of structure and it falls to us to set our own standards, that's where increasingly we're going to have to consider our legacy, if I could put it that way. While the west coast of Scotland can seem quite a wild place, quite a number of venues are extremely popular through the summer with sea kayaking groups. And I'm sure, just like myself, you've occasionally encountered a less than desirable welcome when you've arrived at what would appear to be a fairly remote beach. I'm really mindful of that when I'm out there, and I try to reduce and possibly remove any evidence that I've been there. Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's going to get to be a bigger subject as more and more of us turn to these adventure sports.
We've done work trips together, and I know you're very keen on if we visit an island, then also not contributing to the kind of waste disposal as well. So outside of the subject of human waste, but litter and all those things just turn up at a really small village, and then just us dumping all our rubbish into their bins. It's a big job for them to then get it back off the island. So keeping hold of all that and retaining that as well is just as important, I think. And also, James, thinking about location of where you do these things as well in relation to water sources and campgrounds, and maybe you might go to some venues where multiple groups turn up, and you might have decided on a toilet area that's really good for you, and then another group arrives, and then all of a sudden they're camping on your toilet area. So if other groups turn up, communicating with those about designated areas that you've chosen to use So it's a good question, and I think that, like Nick said, there's a lot of information out there. Whether it's for being up in the mountains, whether it's for being lowland areas, or whether it's for being out near the coast. So hopefully we've given you enough there, but there's also lots to get your teeth into. That's not a very good phrase, getting your teeth into that.
To link this neatly to the overall theme of the discussion in this podcast, I think that this is an area that could very usefully be discussed by a group before they embark on a trip. I've been involved with a number of commercial trips in North America, in British Columbia and Alaska, and prior to embarking on a multi-day sea kayak trip, a substantial amount of time has been spent with group members discussing the protocols of minimizing our impact on the environment, and the subject of waste disposal is addressed overtly together. Agreed methods of practice are decided by the group, and people follow the principles and the rules that are established before they arrive at the first night's camp.
There you go. That's a great way to finish it off. I hope that gives you enough information there, James. So that's it then, folks. I want to thank Dan for taking the time today to chat through us, and it's been really interesting to hear those experiences that you've had, especially to share the experiences where things haven't gone to plan, because I guess we all have those moments where those things happen, and the great learning opportunities, like you say, and it's all part of the adventure, that sometimes we don't always know everything. It'd be boring if we planned it and it went perfectly to plan and nothing was challenging us. So I want to thank you very much, Dan, for taking the time to spend with us today, and maybe come back and speak to us about another subject soon, if you like.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's a great thing we're trying to do here with this podcast. It's a really nice medium for getting information into people's minds as we're thinking about our journeys or driving around the country, which we do so much. So yeah, well done for getting off the ground and going.
Thanks a lot for that. Nick, as always, thanks for your contributions. Really good to hear your perspective on stuff as well.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be involved, and it's really good to chat with you, Dan, about these subjects. So let's do it again sometime.
If you've enjoyed the show, why not take a look at our Essential Members Program? For only £3.60 a month, you get exclusive access to a huge range of videos, articles and webinars covering technical skills, leadership principles and coaching issues from the world of paddle sports, with many topics easily transferred to other adventure sports. We think it's amazing value, so come and check it out. Remember, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, have fun and stay safe.